All right, great. So welcome again to the Great Data States Series, Massachusetts. We're so excited to go on this virtual road trip with everyone. As you are joining the Zoom room, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from. And we are very excited to get started today. I am Jonathan Barry Wolf. I am the Marketing and Communications Manager at Innovate EDU and Project Unicorn. And I'm so excited to be hosting this event. This is one of our favorite webinar series, and it's so exciting to be able to travel to Massachusetts for this iteration of the series. We have so many people on this webinar with us today. Of course, Project Unicorn is so excited to be able to partner with everyone. We have to thank CETA for their continuous support on the Great Data States series, and of course, A4L, the Access for Learning community, for pulling everyone together for our talk today. We'll also hear from representatives from Cambridge Public Schools, Cedar Labs, and the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So I'm very excited about our panel today. We are going to continue with some welcome and introductions. Then I will be passing things off to Rob to talk about motivation. Then we'll pass through to Massachusetts State Reporting Evolution, followed by supporting Massachusetts schools with data needs, privacy enforcement, and transparency, a demo, and then a Q&A and a thank you and some next steps. As you are listening to the webinar, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section of the Zoom room. You will see, as you're looking at the room, you'll see the chat and the Q&A. If you have questions, put them in Q&A and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Really excited about that conversation later on. A couple of items here to talk about with Project Unicorn. Check out the State Commitment to Principles. The State Commitment to Principles is a document that proposes some best practices and next steps for states, districts, and schools about how to cross-collaborate on issues of data interoperability implementation. This is a free resource. We think you all would be great to take advantage of, and the link is in the chat. So be sure to check out that resource. Additionally, encourage districts and ESAs to sign the Project Unicorn School Network Pledge. Pledge signatories receive free technical assistance, free resources, and events like these to help them on their data interoperability journey. It's free to sign up, and so we encourage you to tell your folks about signing the School Network Pledge. Finally, if you like events like these and our other resources and programs from Project Unicorn, sign up for the Project Unicorn newsletter. You can find it at the Project Unicorn website, projectunicorn.org. Scroll to the bottom and fill in your email address in the little box provided here. And we will keep in touch with all the latest news from Project Unicorn. I'm so excited to present our speakers today. We have Steve Smith, the CIO of Cambridge Public Schools, Ben Silberglit, the founder and CSO of Cedar Labs LLC, Rob Curtin, the Associate Commissioner at the Center for District Support at Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Danielle Norton, the Senior Program Manager at Integrated Digital Data Services at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Education. Without further ado, we're going to get things started, and I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon to everyone. As Jonathan said, I'm Rob Curtin, and my role at the department is I lead our assessment, accountability, and data initiatives for the department. And I've been at the department for, I'm in year 21, unbelievably. It's been from a data perspective, it's been kind of a long and winding road. And I think while I want to quickly get to where we are and why we got there, I think it's important to note where we were prior to making some of the big shifts that we've made with our data collection systems and our technology in general. We lived in a world, we had one of the first student information systems in the country, not the first. Florida was ahead of everybody, but we had one of the first student information systems, and it was a flat file based system. And student districts would submit flat files to us on various components, and that we were in that system for a long time. And frankly, while we were first, technology was starting to pass us by, and I guess, as my kids might say, we needed to get with it a little bit. And that led us to start thinking about moving towards interoperability, specifically beginning to work with Larry Fruth, and thinking about moving towards a SIF implementation. And for those that don't know, SIF is the school's interoperability framework. And I'd love to tell you that we decided to make the move and we implemented and everything was great on day one. And that's not exactly what happened. We had some fits and starts. But when I think about motivation, the reason, these four things here in front of you really crystallize why we needed to do this. And I'll just say, I can't imagine living in a world right now where we were not in the position we're in. It's almost hard to think about, but going back to when we decided to make this change, when I first started at the department, I was an analyst at the department, and they needed somebody that had some experience with large data sets. And frankly, when I would see people, or when I would want to talk to people about their data, the different program offices throughout the department, all of a sudden, everybody I went to talk to was on the phone or behind closed doors. And it was difficult for me. Nobody really wanted to talk about data. Well, we live in a completely different world now. The data literacy knowledge and the literacy of all of our staff has increased exponentially over the course of my time at the department, and everybody wants to have accessible data at their fingertips at any time. And our system just wasn't able to do that. Our data got old really quickly, and we weren't able to have that ready data available to whoever might need it, myself, the commissioner, or anybody else in the department, to make the decisions they need to make. Frequency, we used to think we were sort of on top of the world, collecting this data 3 times a year. We were collecting flat files all year round. We had it 3 times a year, and we thought we were great. And then it turned out that we needed more frequent data. We needed to have the ability to see what was happening with our students, and what was happening with our educators. At times, we needed to, at the moment, know where an educator was or know where a student was. And we needed to have more frequent, be able to look at the data more frequently. The next one is really critical in the time that we're living in, the time of pandemic, and that is flexibility. Our old system did not allow us to be flexible in just about any way. If we wanted to make a change to the data collection system, it was a huge undertaking to be able to do that, to do a lot of reprogramming, and it just was a really inflexible system. Well, perhaps no greater example of the utility of SIF has existed, and it's a little bit of a silver lining if we have to find silver linings in the pandemic. And that is what we've been able to do, to turn around some additional data to come to us from through the use of SIF. And I'll give you one example really quickly, okay? Or 2 examples. We needed to very quickly start collecting attendance a couple of different ways. We needed to know the traditional way, whether students were in person, if students were learning in person, were they in school or not. But we also needed to have a way of knowing if students were absent or not from remote learning. So we very quickly had to make some changes to our data system. On March 13, 2020, the world changed and we had to evolve with it. And our data and the capabilities given to us through SIF really allowed us the flexibility to be able to do this. And from the very beginning of the 2020-21 school year, we were able to tell on any given day at any given point how many students were learning remotely, how many were learning in person, how many were learning in a hybrid environment, and what their various what their attendance looked like at any given time starting with the 2020-21 school year. That would not have been possible with our previous data collection systems. And the last is responsiveness. As educators or I should say, as different entities realize that data is available, their demand for responsiveness to requests only grows. We used to be able to get away with, oh, we'll get that to you in the next month or so. That doesn't work any longer. And our data collection system and the way that we've moved towards SIF, and also have the availability on the analytical side that Danielle will talk a little bit about, I think, has allowed us to be responsive to the requests in a way that we never have been before. So these were sort of the 4 key tenets to our motivation for what caused us to make these changes. Like I said, I can't imagine a world where we weren't in a SIF environment, and having the data capabilities that we have today. We certainly wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that we've done. I should mention, none of this would have been possible without the partnership of formerly SIF, now A4L, under the leadership of Larry Fruth. Also partners with Cedar Labs now. None of this would be possible without the wonderful partnership of those 2 organizations and the people that work for those organizations. So I'm happy to at some point take any questions about where we were, why we decided to where we go. But I think with that, I'll turn it over to Danielle to give you a little bit more on the specifics.
Hi, I'm Danielle Norton. I'm a program manager at EOE IT, the Executive Office of Education, and I work very closely with Rob implementing their business needs. And just to sum up, we found ourselves in a really interesting time period where, there were increasing needs at all levels. The districts have increasing data needs. The state has increasing data needs. There's a huge push for evidence-based decision-making and policy-making, and we really needed to support those needs. But in order to support those needs, we needed more data, we needed more transparency, more responsiveness, real-time data collection, real-time flexibility, and increased security as the stewards of all of that data. And all the while, as Rob said, we were, one of the first states in. So our technology platforms were actually pretty old. So we're sort of stuffing new things and new standards into older technology, and we all know how that goes. We want to make the best of what we have, but there comes a time when you have to take a look at your portfolio and think, ooh, this needs some rationalization. And at the same time that our ecosystem was getting more and more complex, and the needs for data and interoperability were increasing, the district levels were getting more and more complex. They're in the exact same situation that the state is. So we basically found ourselves in the middle of our SIF implementation, which is where I came in, sort of 2016-ish. So we had a pretty standard implementation arc, I would say. Always change management is difficult with any system you're implementing. And ours, our first wave of implementation took about 4 years. And we found ourselves at a crossroads. Again, our districts needed better responsiveness, more interaction. Rob's team needed more and more data and more flexibility to implement their data needs. And they have a really strong data quality program. So they have more and more needs for validating the data that comes in so that we know the data that we're using is good for policymaking. So we took a look at what we had, and what we found was we really liked our standards. The SIF standard worked for us. The use cases that we had were being met, and it was flexible enough for us to be able to implement as needed for Massachusetts' needs on the fly. And this is a partnership that's been working. What we did discover, though, was our technology platforms were aging, and we were tech bound at that moment in time. So it was an interesting time period because at the same time, the governor's office was implementing a new push to move to the cloud. So we were able to obtain capital funding to push our portfolio modernization forward. And we've been moving along that timeline ever since, and modernization of our portfolio, moving it to the cloud and rationalizing our portfolios, it's one of the higher priorities of the Executive Office of Education. So we started with a bigger box on-prem, and then we started our move to the cloud. So our move to Cedar Labs as our messaging broker was one of our first capital projects, and it was a huge success. We've definitely achieved a level of flexibility and speed with Cedar Labs, and also transparency with our messaging that we weren't able to technically before. And then we started to move on. Steve's going to talk about the incredible work that they're doing with student data privacy and integrating the student data privacy rules with our messaging standards. And we're moving our older, and some of our applications for data collections are 20 years old. So it's time. Those applications are being refactored and moved into the Cedar Labs platform, so that we're going to be a pretty integrated and flexible platform. And we're hoping that that's going to, bring us into the future and enable a lot of responsiveness, flexibility, and two-way communication with our district. And I think I'll turn it over to
Great.
Steve.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Danielle. Steve Smith, the CIO in Cambridge Public Schools, Cambridge, Mass. And I have been here in this position. This is my 16th school year, so not quite as long as Rob at the department, but I feel like I've been along the same journey and have some scars to show for it, but we're really in a good position now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about from the district's perspective. Danielle and Rob both talked about the modernization of the state reporting from their perspective. But I can tell you today, going from that flat file experience to a completely automated, almost real-time collection of our data from our SIS is just like night and day. What used to be a constant headache is now something that just runs for us. And this picture here kind of demonstrates the idea of breaking off from the state integration hub that Danielle was talking about to a district version of this. The idea being that we could leverage all the efforts that districts put into cleaning their data and sending the right data to the state to be able to reuse that data. So we're not duplicating efforts and creating another set of data for other purposes, such as rostering and reporting and things like that. So the idea that we could use that clean data for other purposes and take some of the pressure off of districts was really at the core of the idea of the Mass Data Hub. At the same time, we wanted to address, from the district's perspective, we often feel like we're put in the middle between, SIS vendors and applications around standards, saying that we're using this standard or that standard. And then when it comes down to it, we realize that no one's really using any standard out of the box. They're all tweaking them a little bit for their own purposes. We wanted to take that pressure off of districts and being able to kind of incorporate that into what we call the District Data Hub services that Cedar Lab is able to extend to the districts in that bottom picture there. And of course, meet each individual district's needs, where they're at. Just like every state is different, and every state has different solutions, every district is different within a state and has different needs. And by leveraging the state data reporting and then providing services on top of that, we're really able to meet those individual district needs. And one thing I really want to focus on today is the idea of enforcing privacy requirements on top of that data that the district has control over. And I'll have some more information about that. So just real quickly, kind of our journey, you saw kind of the timeline from the state's perspective of their data collection. The idea of what we call the Mass Data Hub for districts to use started back in 2019 at an A4L conference. And since that time up through 2020, we did a lot of kind of background work, meeting with vendors, understanding their kind of needs around rostering and using different standards, and closely working with Cedar Labs and Ben, who you'll hear from in a couple of minutes, determining the best approach to kind of build out that district level hub. And then in 2021, we did a small pilot just here in Cambridge. And then we did an early release with 8 Massachusetts school districts last school year to start using the data hub. And then we expanded it over this past summer to more kind of early release districts as we're working through the functionality and needs of those districts. We want to make sure that the functionality within the data hub is able to meet all those unique district needs. And again, this is kind of embedded in what I've been saying, but meet the districts where they are. We want to reduce the burden on the districts and kind of leverage all the effort they've already put into their state data collection. And as a result, kind of reduce the risk, ensure the accuracy, and on top of that, kind of have this privacy wrapper around what we're talking about. Just another visual of the idea of the district sending all their data through Cedar Labs, with some of satisfying the state reporting requirements, but also being able to satisfy many other district requirements from that central hub. So just some key concepts of the hub itself. Obviously, being able to manage what data and which students are sent to each vendor. And I think the key is in the user interface, and hopefully Ben will show you a little bit of the ease of use of their hub to create these templates to share data. And then, actually, I didn't put this in the slide, but being able to share those templates across districts in the state. So we're leveraging each other's work. If one district does that work to modify, the standard for one particular application A and tweak it a little bit, that template can be shared across the state. All other districts are using the data hub, so we don't have to replicate work. And then obviously transforming it and anonymizing data. I kind of talked about connecting non-compliant vendors with vendors that aren't using any of the standards, being able to meet any of the kind of sharing and rostering requirements. And then, of course, working in partnership with the Student Data Privacy Consortium, which is a subgroup of the Access for Learning focused on privacy operational issues. Hopefully, most of you have heard about the consortium. There's been a lot of work done over the past 6 or 7 years around standardizing data privacy agreements, but today we're going to talk about taking it a step further and being able to enforce privacy obligations. So again, this is just blowing up the bottom half of that picture that I showed you earlier and emphasizing the red box that on top of all those services for districts, that we can also put this kind of privacy layer. And what that is what we call the Global Education Privacy Standard, which I'm going to talk through this diagram for a minute, and then I'll explain what we mean by a standard. But what we're looking at is kind of the workflow of a district that is onboarding an application. In the upper left-hand corner, having a written contract or a data privacy agreement with the vendor, which is really required, to share any data with an online service. And that DPA, data privacy agreement, has legal contract clauses in there. Being able to translate those clauses into obligations. And then as you go over to the right on the green line, connecting those obligations to control benchmark sets. And these would be actual security controls to meet the privacy obligations. For example, some states have certain NIST requirements that need to be in place to meet the privacy obligations. And those vary today across states. We are on another project trying to address that and get out in front of that and have one set of security requirements to protect education data. But this model is built such that as data privacy agreements are signed, they can be aligned to obligations in any control benchmarks that are required in that jurisdiction, and then captured in that red box in the bottom. And this is the standard quote, right? It was published as part of the Unity infrastructure spec about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, as a privacy obligation document. And it's basically an XML file that has placeholders for all the privacy metadata around the data. So all the obligations that go along to protect that data can be captured in these pods. And then those pods exchanged over the wire. So it really is the first example of privacy over the wire. So going back to the picture here, if you can envision, a district such as Cambridge, that we are using the data hub to roster district apps on the right-hand side. Down here in the yellow, we have the Student Data Privacy Consortium registry. We are pulling in the pods or doing some kind of a lookup so that the data hub can obtain the pods related to that particular application, because it's all tied back to the data privacy agreement that they signed. And those pods can be exchanged and certified so that before any data is actually sent to the vendor has certified that they understand and can meet all the privacy obligations around protecting that data. And thus we are basically enforcing privacy obligations via the district data hub. So on top of all the kind of services, leveraging our state data collection, being able to roster from one place, being able to take the workload off of the district around meeting all the different rostering requirements into the powerful Cedar Labs tool. We're also able to enforce privacy around the district's data and feel very confident that we have created a secure ecosystem with our education data. And now I think, oh no, actually I have a couple other things to mention. Just a quick screenshot about sharing data with systems. And again, I think Ben's going to get into this a little bit more, but being able to select, which students at which grade and which data is going to the vendor. But more importantly, I wanted to show you that in addition to that, having that privacy enforcement layer, there's the transparency piece, being able to, the parent calls up and says, where is my students or my child's data going and what protections are put around it? Since the data hub has all those pods, the privacy obligations, and knows where the data is going, it can print out a report for the parent to say, this is where all your child's data going to these applications. These are the data elements that are going. And for each of those applications, these are the actual obligations that the vendor has agreed to protect your data. So really being completely transparent with the parent about how their child's data is being protected and where it's going. Very powerful stuff. So now I do think I'm going to be turning it over to Ben.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Sobergullet. I'm one of the co-founders of Cedar Labs. We've been around since 2013. We're a cloud-native provider of data integration tools, data validation, privacy, and also state longitudinal data systems. And we're going to dive into the software here. I'm sorry. Here in Minnesota at 1 o'clock, the first Wednesday of every month, the tornado sirens all go off. It's kind of a Midwestern thing, and they're going off in the background. So I apologize for the background noise. And I'd just say before we get started, it's really a delight to work with such a wicked smart group of people over there in Massachusetts. It's been really fun working on this project and leveraging the data to do all these great things. And I think it was introduced really well, so I don't need to belabor any points, except that really what we've done is we've leveraged this Unity data standards, the new version of SIF. That provides the ability to move data over a REST API. I saw a question come in there about ZISs, which is sort of SIF has moved on from the concept of a zone integration server. When we're able to leverage this data and move it in real time in multiple directions and really serve lots of different purposes. So we've really been able to take that standard and show off its capability, which is what we're excited to do here. And then also layer in this privacy layer. And so you can go ahead and hit play, Jonathan. Thank you. And so this first view is just showing from a district perspective all the different software systems that a district might need to manage. And they can quickly add software systems, and they can see for each system which students are being sent and what data are being sent for those particular students. And then if they drill in, here's where they can create or modify a template. And Steve mentioned you can share these templates. And what these templates do is they govern how the data is coming in and how that data needs to get to a vendor. And it does it all through drag and drop, through a no-code interface. And so they can go in and they can identify the different files that they might need to send if the vendor needs the data via flat files. This also constructs the REST API endpoints if that vendor is able to handle the data coming in via an API. Then within each of those files or within each of those endpoints, you can identify the specific fields that need to be sent, and from the source system, what those fields represent. So here's that sort of list of fields that you have access to that are already coming in via state data collection or supplemental data uploads. And then you can quickly filter in and say, well, I want to look at the gender field. I'm going to apply that here. And then, not all business rules are alike. And so what we do is we provide the ability to transform that data, again, in a no-code framework. So you can use when-thens to say, well, if it's an M, we need to put male in for this particular system. Or if it's empty, it needs to be a U because this particular system requires the field. And so you can do all of that. You can specify the delivery options if you want to send it via SFTP or REST API, and then submit it. And the data just start flowing to that system. And then the next piece to this is the privacy layer. And what that does, if you want to switch over to that other tab, Jonathan, and go ahead and hit go. What that does, you noticed with the different software systems, in addition to the what data and which students, you also see the privacy obligations. And we're able to get those right from that SDPC registry. And so that's already on file. It's the contractual obligations that the district and the vendor have agreed to. We bring those in, and in addition to the what data, right, you need to know where all your data are if you want to keep it private. We can identify for a particular student or a group of students, you can type in their name, and it'll pull up all the software systems that student's data are being shared with, what privacy obligations are governing that data, and then you can simply hit print, and you can share that report with a parent or with an interested party. So really what we're trying to do is just make that as transparent as possible, not just the data integration and kind of how that data is moving from A to B, but which data for which students and what privacy obligations govern that data. Again, leveraging the infrastructure that's already in place in Massachusetts to collect that data via SIF, and then upcycling that from the old version of SIF, SIF2 into SIF Unity, and then sharing that or branching that data out. It's really been an exciting project. And I think I'm passing it back to Jonathan, I believe, for the Q&A.
All right, excellent. So thank you all so much for sharing today. As we move into the Q&A, folks in the audience, please put your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom room, and we will start asking. I have a question I'd love to ask you all. What recommendations do you all have for states that are interested in implementing data modernization with interoperability?
Yeah, I'll start there sort of from the non-technical perspective, and then let the smart folks get into some of the real recommendations. I would say, you know, we really needed to think ahead and think about what the use cases of the future were going to be. And it's real easy in especially now during the pandemic and stuff to get really caught up in the day to day. But when you're thinking about monetization, that doesn't mean today, that doesn't mean tomorrow. It actually means like 2, 3, 5 years from now. And so I would really encourage anybody to think about, you know, what's your wildest dreams about how you might use data, and think about what you can leverage to get you there, when thinking about perhaps modernizing from where the current state is now.
I would also encourage people to make a full transition. So one of the things that we did immediately was we took our flat file format and tried to stuff our more richer data use cases into the flat file format. And that caused a lot of, I'll call it learning friction, because we were receiving data that wasn't transparent to the district, and we were transforming it into another format. And we had to do a lot of explaining and a lot of digging around troubleshooting with people. And if we had just made the jump immediately, we may have had an easier learning curve, but at the same time, it would have been a much more major business transformation effort. So it's sort of a trade-off, but something to think about. Sorry, Ben.
No, go ahead, Danielle. That was great. You know, I think just the one piece that I'd emphasize from the technical perspective is that flexibility. And you certainly, you know, you heard that clearly from Rob and Danielle, is that you're building for the future when you're modernizing. You're not building for the now. And making sure that you have a platform that's going to be able to give you that flexibility to meet needs as they come up. They invariably do. Things change, things come at you. The pandemic is a great example of a case where states really needed to pivot and pivot quickly. And so when you have pieces in place that have that flexibility and that scalability would be the other piece. We actually, we were commissioned to do a performance test of the A4L Unity data standard, just to kind of showcase how much data A4L, the Unity standard, can move. And we were able to move, I think it was about 350 million records in an hour, which is leaps and bounds beyond what any state probably needs right now. But you see those data needs growing, right? And as more and more data is coming, as more and more sort of online learning tools are available, that sort of moment-to-moment learning data is really growing, and there's a lot of value in that information. And we're going to want to be able to get at that information really quickly and be able to learn from it and gather it and analyze it. And so having platforms in place that can handle that kind of load get you ready for as those systems come in place, right? You don't want to be wrestling with data integration needs when you want to be answering those questions.
Yeah, Jonathan, if I can just put a point on one more thing. I don't know how many SEA leaders are out there in the audience, but one thing you need to do, and this was a little bit of a lesson learned for us, right, is be really transparent with the districts about how you're going to use this data, and what having access to the kind of data that I have and my staff have access to on a daily basis, what you're planning on doing with it, and what you're not planning on doing with it is actually probably most important, right? But getting out in front of that can save a lot of headaches down the road.
Excellent. And we have a question in the Q&A. John asked, I am curious about best use of the CCSSO digital resources, data elements, and plans to include automated speed testing. Any thoughts?
Yeah, that goes to the smart people.
That sounds like it'll be a good follow-up question that we can follow up with John afterward and make sure that he gets that answer. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to thank our panelists for being here today and sharing all of their information with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, all of you in the audience, for being here today. I want to talk a little bit about next steps. We are taking a trip from Massachusetts and crossing the country to Oklahoma for the next webinar in the Great Data States series. That's going to be on September 22nd. We have a link in the chat for that as well. So be sure to register for that, and we will see you there. Also, everyone in the audience will receive a link to the recording of this webinar after this call, so you can watch again and share it out to your folks, as well as a link to register for this webinar. I want to thank everyone once again for being here. This was a wonderful, wonderful event, and we are so excited to see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone. See you later.